They laughed when a broken veteran bought a $5 farm. But the moment his dog started digging, everything changed. No one in town believed Caleb Hayes had anything left. A worn-out truck, a collapsing farm, and a past that wouldn't let him sleep. This was all he carried into the mountains. But his German shepherd, Ranger, kept watching, waiting, like he knew something Caleb didn't. And the night the ground finally broke open, it wasn't just dirt they uncovered. It was a secret buried for decades, one that could change everything or destroy it. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The first thing people noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that settles gently over a quiet valley at dusk, but a heavy, hollow silence, almost like the land itself had given up trying to be heard. The wind moved through the broken fences with a dry whisper, carrying dust instead of life. The farmhouse stood in the middle of it all, worn down and leaning ever so slightly, like an old man too tired to stand straight anymore. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving behind gray, splintered wood that looked like it had been stripped bare by years of unforgiving winters. The porch sagged in the middle. One of the windows was cracked, the glass spider-webbed and dull. The barn off to the side looked even worse. Its roof partially collapsed. Its red paint faded into a tired brown. Rust clung to every hinge, every nail, every forgotten piece of machinery scattered across the yard. And that was the place Caleb Hayes chose to buy. Word spread fast through the small Wyoming town. Well, it always did. By the time Caleb's old pickup truck rumbled down the narrow dirt road leading up to the property, a handful of locals had already gathered nearby, leaning against their vehicles, watching like they were about to witness something between a tragedy and a joke. $5, one man muttered, shaking his head. He paid $5 for that? Another let out a dry laugh. Should have been free. Even then, I wouldn't take it. Caleb didn't respond. He pulled the truck to a slow stop by the crooked wooden gate, the engine coughing once before falling quiet. For a moment, he just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the land in front of him. Then the passenger door opened. A large German shepherd jumped down first, landing lightly on the dry ground. His coat caught what little sunlight broke through the clouds, dark sable mixed with streaks of gold, and his ears stood alert, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. His name was Ranger. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply stood beside the truck, still and focused, as if measuring the land in a way no human could. A second later, Caleb stepped out. He moved slower than he used to. Not weak, just careful. Every motion deliberate. At 68, his body still carried the strength of a man who had spent his life pushing it beyond limits. But there was a stiffness now, a quiet reminder of years that didn't come easy. His face was weathered, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. There was something distant in his gaze, something that never quite settled. He wore a faded flannel shirt beneath a heavy jacket, worn jeans, and boots that had seen more ground than most people ever would. He didn't look at the people watching him. Instead, he looked at the farm. Ranger stepped closer to his side, brushing lightly against his leg. Caleb rested his hand on the dog's head for just a moment, not as a command, not as reassurance, but something quieter, familiar. The kind of touch that didn't need explanation. Behind them, one of the men spoke up louder this time, making sure his voice carried. "You really bought that place, old man?" Caleb didn't turn around. "Sure did," he said, his voice calm, steady. A few chuckles followed. "You know the roof leaks, right?" Another called out. "Barn's about ready to fall over, too." "And the well's dry," someone added. "Has been for years." Caleb nodded once, as if they were just confirming details he already knew. No, appreciate the heads up. The man closest to the fence crossed his arms. You planning on fixing all that? Caleb finally glanced over his shoulder, just briefly. Not confrontational, not defensive, just a look. I didn't come here for perfect. That seemed to confuse them more than anything. He turned back toward the property, unlatched the gate, and pushed it open. The wood creaked loudly in protest, the sound echoing across the empty land. Ranger moved ahead first, stepping onto the property like he belonged there. His nose lowered slightly, catching scents buried deep beneath layers of dust and thyme. His body stayed alert, but there was no hesitation in his stride. Caleb followed. Each step across the ground kicked up small clouds of dirt. The grass beneath his boots was brittle, yellowed, and uneven, but nothing about the place looked alive. And yet, there was something else. Something quieter. He stopped halfway between the gate and the house. For a long moment, he said nothing. Behind him, the distant voices of the townspeople faded into the background. The wind shifted again, brushing against the trees at the edge of the property. The tall pines stood like silent witnesses, their dark silhouettes framing the land as if guarding it. Caleb took a slow breath. The air was cold, carrying the faint scent of rain that hadn't arrived yet. He closed his eyes for just a second, and for the first time in a long time, the noise inside his head softened. Not gone, never gone, but quieter. Ranger returned to his side, sitting beside him without being told. The dog's gaze moved across the land again, more focused now, as if something unseen had already caught his attention. Caleb opened his eyes. "This'll do," he said quietly. Back at the fence, one of the men scoffed. "He's lost it." "Yeah," another replied. "Give him a month. He'll be gone." But Caleb didn't hear them anymore. Or maybe he did, and chose not to. He picked up his duffel bag from the truck, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward the house. The porch groaned under his weight as he stepped onto it. Up close, the damage was worse. The wood felt soft in places, like it had been rotting from the inside out. He pushed the front door open. It resisted at first, then gave way with a sharp crack. Dust filled the air instantly, drifting through the dim light that slipped in through the broken windows. The inside smelled like old wood, damp earth, and something forgotten. Ranger stepped in behind him, slower this time. The dog paused just inside the doorway. His ears twitched. His body stiffened slightly. Then, without a sound, he turned his head toward the far end of the room, as if listening to something Caleb couldn't hear. Caleb didn't notice. Not yet. He walked further inside, setting his bag down near the wall. His eyes moved across the room, taking in every broken board, every cracked surface, every sign of neglect. Most people would have seen ruin. Caleb saw something else. A place where no one expected anything from him. A place where no one knew him. A place where the past might finally lose its grip. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the loose boards of the barn. Ranger remained near the doorway, still staring toward the same direction, while his gaze locked on something buried beneath layers of silence. Something hidden. Something waiting. And far beneath the dry, lifeless soil of that forgotten farm, something else rested in darkness. Not just forgotten, not just abandoned, but sealed away for a reason. No one in that town knew it. Not the men who laughed. Not the ones who warned him. Not even Caleb. But the land wasn't empty. And it hadn't been for a very long time. Caleb didn't know that yet. What he did know was that the silence here felt different. That night, the temperature dropped fast as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The sky turned a deep, endless blue, and the wind carried a sharp chill that slipped through every crack in the old farmhouse walls. Caleb sat on the floor with his back against the wall, and a small lantern casting a weak circle of light around him. Ranger lay a few feet away, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but not asleep. Never fully asleep. Caleb had tried to rest. He really had. But the moment his eyes shut, the darkness behind them came alive. The sound of a helicopter rotor, low and heavy, sand hitting his face, a voice shouting through static. Then the blast. He jerked awake before the memory could finish. His breath came fast, chest tight, heart pounding like it was trying to escape. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. His hand instinctively reached for something that wasn't there anymore. A weapon, a mission, a command. Instead, his fingers met cold wooden floorboards. The silence returned. Too quiet. Caleb dragged a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. "Oh, you're not there anymore," he muttered under his breath. "You made it back." But back never really felt like anywhere. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching at the change in Caleb's breathing. The dog rose without a sound and walked over, pressing his body gently against Caleb's side. Not demanding, not anxious, just there. Caleb rested his hand on the dog's neck, fingers sinking into the thick fur. His grip tightened for a second, then loosened. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know." Ranger stayed like that for a while, steady and warm, until Caleb's breathing slowed again. It wasn't the first night like this, and it wouldn't be the last. Morning came without warning. A pale gray light slipped through the cracked windows, cutting across the room in thin lines. Caleb had barely slept. He pushed himself up stiffly, his joints protesting as he stood. Outside, the land looked just as lifeless in daylight, maybe more. Ranger was already at the door, waiting. Caleb grabbed his jacket and stepped out into the cold air. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still holding onto traces of snow. The wind carried the smell of pine and something else, something older. They walked the property together. No words, just the sound of boots on dry ground and the soft padding of paws beside him. Caleb moved slowly along the fence line, inspecting what little remained. Posts were broken, wires rusted through. He made mental notes without writing anything down. Years of training had taught him to remember details without needing reminders. Ranger moved ahead, weaving through patches of tall, brittle grass. Then he stopped, when Caleb noticed it right away. The dog's posture changed, subtle but clear. His ears stood sharper, his tail lowered slightly, not in fear, but focus. "What is it?" Caleb asked. Ranger didn't respond. He stood still, staring toward the far end of the property, near the old barn. Caleb followed his gaze. Nothing. Just the same broken structure, leaning under its own weight, surrounded by uneven ground and scattered debris. "Probably a rabbit," Caleb said, more to himself than the dog. Ranger didn't move. For a moment, Caleb considered walking over to check, but the wind shifted again, cold and biting, and he felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Too open, too exposed. Old instincts didn't fade, they just changed shape. "Come on," he said. Ranger hesitated, then obeyed. But as they walked away, the dog glanced back once more. By midday, Caleb had started working. He found an old hammer in the truck and began reinforcing parts of the porch, replacing loose boards where he could. The wood was brittle, splitting easily under pressure. Every fix felt temporary, like trying to hold together something that had already decided to fall apart. Sweat mixed with the cold air, clinging to his skin. His hands moved automatically, measure, adjust, secure. Work helped. It gave his mind something to focus on, something real. But even then, the quiet crept in. No distant traffic, no voices, No movement, just wind, and the occasional creak of old wood shifting. By late afternoon, a truck rolled slowly past the property. Caleb noticed it before he heard it. He straightened, eyes narrowing slightly as it approached. Oh, the vehicle stopped just outside the gate. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, mid-50s. He leaned against the door like he had all the time in the world. "Thought I'd come see it for myself," the man called out. Caleb didn't answer right away. The man smirked. "Name's Travis Boone. Got land just over that ridge." Caleb nodded once. "Caleb." Travis looked around, taking in the farm with a slow, exaggerated sweep of his gaze. "Hell of a place you bought," he said. There was something in his tone. Not quite friendly, not quite hostile. Just watching. Caleb rested the hammer on the porch railing. "It'll do." Travis chuckled under his breath. "You know why it was a dollar deal, right?" "5," Caleb corrected. "5," Travis repeated with a shrug. "Still too much." He kicked at the dirt near his boots. People don't stay here long." Caleb's eyes stayed on him now. "Why's that?" Travis met his gaze for a moment, then looked past him toward the barn. "Bad ground," he said simply. "Nothing grows, nothing lasts." A pause, then he added quieter. "And sometimes things get left behind." Caleb didn't respond. Travis pushed himself off the truck. "Anyway," he said, clapping his hands once, "just figured I'd welcome you to the neighborhood." There was no warmth in it. He got back in his truck, started the engine, and drove off without another word. Dust followed in his wake, slowly settling back onto the dry earth. Caleb stood there for a long moment. Then he turned. Ranger was already facing the barn again, still, watching. And this time, Caleb didn't look away so quickly. He followed Ranger's gaze toward the barn, at the old structure standing crooked against the wind like it had something to prove. From a distance, it looked empty, just wood, rust, and decay. But something about the way the dog stood there, still, alert, unmoving, made Caleb pause longer than he intended. "All right," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. "We'll check it later." Ranger didn't move. Caleb turned away first. There was work to be done. The next few days settled into a rhythm. Wake up early. Move before the thoughts caught up. Fix what you could. Ignore what you couldn't. Caleb worked from sunrise to sunset, patching holes in the roof, replacing loose boards, clearing out debris that had piled up for years. Every task took longer than it should have. The tools were old. The materials were worse. Sometimes he had to stop halfway through a repair because something else broke the moment he touched it. But he kept going. Because stopping meant thinking. And thinking was where things got dangerous. The first time it hit him during the day, he was halfway up a ladder, trying to secure a loose beam near the edge of the roof. A sudden gust of wind rattled the wood beneath his boots. For a split second, it wasn't wind anymore. It was rotor wash. The sky wasn't gray. It was filled with spinning blades and dust, voices shouting, "Move! Move!" Caleb froze. His grip tightened on the hammer, knuckles turning white. The ladder creaked beneath him. Below, Ranger barked sharply. Once. It snapped him back. The wind returned to just wind. The mountains were still there. The house beneath him, old, broken, but real. And Caleb exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling as he forced himself to focus. "I'm good," he said quietly. Ranger didn't look convinced. The dog stood at the base of the ladder, eyes locked on him, muscles tense like he was ready to move at any second. Caleb climbed down carefully. When his boots touched the ground, Ranger stepped closer, pressing against his leg again. Not just comfort, checking. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's head. "Yeah," he said. I'm still here. By the end of the first week, the place didn't look much better. But it looked less forgotten. The porch held weight now. The front door closed properly. One room inside the house had been cleared enough to sleep in without worrying about the floor giving out. It wasn't progress most people would notice, but Caleb did, and that was enough. Each evening, he sat on the porch with a can of food in his hand, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. The sky turned gold, then orange, then a deep red before fading into darkness. It was the only time the land felt alive. Ranger always sat beside him, sometimes lying down, sometimes watching the distance, always aware, always present. The people in town didn't stop watching. They just stopped pretending they weren't. Trucks passed by slower than necessary. A few drivers leaned out their windows, taking a longer look than curiosity alone would justify. Caleb ignored them. Until one afternoon, when Travis Boone showed up again. This time, he didn't stay by the gate. He drove right in. Caleb was near the fence line when the truck rolled across the property, tires crunching over dry earth. Ranger noticed first, as lifting his head and turning toward the sound. Caleb straightened slowly. Travis stepped out, hands tucked casually into his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the land like he was measuring something. "You've been busy," he said. Caleb didn't answer right away. "Trying to keep it from falling apart," he said finally. Travis smirked. "That's gonna take more than a hammer and hope." Ranger moved slightly closer to Caleb's side. Travis noticed. "Dog's sharp," he said. "Military?" Caleb nodded once. "Same as me." "Figures." Travis walked a few steps further onto the property, his boots leaving shallow impressions in the dirt. He stopped near a patch of ground just beyond the barn, glancing down for a moment before looking back up. "You planning on staying long?" he asked. Caleb studied him. "Planning on it." Travis shrugged. "Most don't." "Why's that?" Travis didn't answer immediately. He looked around again, slower this time, like he was searching for something he couldn't quite see. "Land like this," he said, trailing off. "It's got a way of pushing people out." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Or maybe," Travis added, "they just realize too late it ain't worth the trouble." Ranger let out a low, almost silent growl, not loud enough to draw attention, but enough for Caleb to feel it through the air. Travis heard it too. His eyes flicked toward the dog, then back to Caleb. A faint smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Anyway," he said, turning back toward his truck, "just thought I'd check in." He paused before getting in. "Some things on this land," he added, almost casually, "better left buried." Then he drove off. That night, the wind came harder. It howled through the gaps in the walls, rattling the boards, making the house groan like it was alive. Caleb lay on the makeshift bed he'd set up in the cleared room, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. It never did when the wind sounded like that. Ranger wasn't lying down. He stood near the doorway, facing the direction of the barn, still, watching. After a while, Caleb sat up. "You hear something?" he asked. Ranger didn't move, but his ears twitched. Caleb listened. At first, nothing. Just wind. Then, something else. A faint, distant sound. Not loud. Not clear, but there. Like something shifting beneath the ground. Caleb frowned. Probably the structure settling, he told himself. Old wood. Old earth. Nothing more. But Ranger didn't relax. And neither did Caleb. Not after a moment, he stood, grabbed his jacket, and stepped outside. The cold hit him immediately. The sky was dark, clouds moving fast across it, blocking what little light the moon offered. The barn stood in the distance, its outline barely visible. Ranger moved ahead of him this time, not fast, not aggressive, just certain. They stopped a few yards from the barn. The ground here felt different. Caleb couldn't explain it, but he felt it. A subtle shift under his boots, like the earth wasn't as solid as it should be. Ranger lowered his head slightly, sniffing the air, then the ground. He let out a quiet whine. Not fear. Recognition. Caleb looked down at the dirt. Dry. Cracked. Ordinary. And yet, tomorrow, Caleb said under his breath. Ranger didn't move. Caleb took one last look at the ground, then turned back toward the house. Behind them, the wind moved across the land again, and beneath the surface, something waited, unseen, unbroken, and not nearly as forgotten as it should have been. Morning came colder than the day before. A thin layer of frost clung to the dry grass, turning the brittle field pale under the early light. The mountains stood quiet in the distance, their peaks glowing faintly as the sun pushed its way over the horizon. It should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. Caleb stood on the porch with a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand, staring toward the barn. Ranger was already off the steps, waiting, not pacing, not restless, just fixed. "You're not letting this go, are you?" Caleb muttered. The dog didn't respond. He didn't need to. When Caleb took a slow sip, then set the cup down on the railing. His fingers lingered there for a second longer than necessary. Something about the night before still sat wrong in his chest. That sound, faint, distant, too steady to be random. "All right," he said finally. "Let's take a look." Ranger moved the moment the words left his mouth. The ground felt different as they approached. It wasn't obvious at first, just a subtle shift. The kind of thing most people wouldn't notice. But Caleb had spent too many years reading terrain, understanding how the earth behaved under pressure, under weight, under time. And this wasn't natural. The dirt near the barn dipped slightly inward, forming a shallow depression that didn't match the rest of the land. It wasn't deep enough to draw attention, but it was there. Caleb stopped at the edge of it. Ranger stepped forward, slow, deliberate. The dog lowered his head and began sniffing the ground again, tracing a small, uneven circle as if following something invisible. Then he stopped and started digging. Not the playful kind, not the casual scratching of a dog chasing a scent. This was focused, sharp, urgent. "Hey," Caleb said, stepping closer. "What have you got?" Ranger didn't stop. Dirt kicked up behind him, dry soil breaking apart under his paws. The sound was louder than it should have been, each scrape echoing slightly against something below. Caleb frowned. That wasn't right. He crouched down, brushing away some of the loose dirt with his hand. The ground beneath felt harder. Not rock, not packed soil, something else. "Hold on," he said quietly. Ranger paused, he stepping back just enough to give him space, but his eyes never left the spot. Caleb reached into the truck parked nearby and grabbed a shovel. When he drove it into the ground, the blade didn't sink in smoothly. It hit something. A dull, solid resistance. Caleb froze for a second. Then he pushed again, angling the shovel to clear more dirt. Metal. The sound was unmistakable. A low, hollow clang. Ranger's ears shot forward. Caleb knelt down fully now, using both hands to scrape away the dirt. The soil came loose quickly once the top layer was broken, revealing more of what lay beneath. A flat surface. Dark. smooth in a way nothing out here should be. His fingers brushed across it, clearing away the last thin layer of dust. Steel. Old, but intact. Caleb leaned back slightly, staring at it. "No way," he whispered. But Ranger stepped closer again, but this time, slower, more cautious. The dog sniffed the exposed metal, then pulled his head back, letting out a quiet, uneasy breath. Caleb noticed that. "You feel it too, huh?" He didn't know what he meant by that, but he felt something, a faint chill rising from the ground, not from the air, from below. Caleb stood and began digging around the edges, widening the hole. It took time. The dirt was packed tight around whatever this was, like it had settled into place years ago and never been disturbed since. Minutes passed, then nearly an hour. Sweat formed along Caleb's neck despite the cold air. Finally, the shape became clear. A rectangular hatch, large, heavy, buried just deep enough to stay hidden. Caleb stepped back, breathing a little harder now. "Oh, what the hell is this doing here?" he murmured. Ranger didn't answer, but he didn't move closer either. That alone said enough. Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at the edges of the hatch. There was a handle, thick, reinforced, rusted, but still solid. The hinges were partially exposed, built strong, designed to hold. This wasn't farm equipment. This wasn't storage. This was something meant to stay closed. For a long time, Caleb just stood there. His instincts kicked in, old ones, buried deep but never gone. Unknown structure, underground, no markings, no context. Everything about it said one thing: be careful. He glanced at Ranger. The dog's body was tense again, but not panicked. Alert, ready, waiting for Caleb to decide. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Not today," he said. He saw. But he grabbed a loose board from nearby and laid it over the exposed hatch, covering it just enough to keep it out of sight. Then he shoveled some dirt back over the edges. Not enough to hide it completely. Just enough. Ranger watched every movement. "You found it," Caleb said quietly, resting a hand on the dog's back. "Whatever this is, you found it." Ranger leaned slightly into the touch, but his eyes never left the ground. That night, Caleb didn't sit on the porch. He stayed inside. The lantern flickered softly, shadows stretching across the walls as the wind picked up again outside. The house creaked and shifted, every sound sharper now, louder than it had been before. Because now, he knew something was out there. Not just land, not just broken wood and empty space. Something built, something buried, and something hidden on purpose. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped loosely in front of him. His mind ran through possibilities: old bunker, storage vault, abandoned shelter. None of them felt right. Because of one detail. There were no markings. Nothing to explain why it was there, or who put it there, or what was inside. Ranger stood by the doorway again, watching, always watching. Caleb looked up at him. "You think it's nothing?" he asked. The dog didn't move, didn't blink. Caleb gave a quiet, humorless breath. "Yeah," he said. "Me neither." Outside, the wind howled across the land, brushing over the barn, over the broken fences, over the spot where the earth had been disturbed. And beneath that thin layer of dirt and steel, whatever had been sealed away for years was still there, waiting for someone to open it. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling as the lantern burned low beside him. The shadows shifted with every gust of wind, stretching and shrinking along the walls like something breathing in the dark. His mind kept circling back to the same image: steel, buried, deliberate. He had seen things like that before. Not farms, not places like this, but hidden compartments, sealed doors, structures meant to keep something in or keep people out. And nothing about that hatch felt accidental. Ranger never lay down. The dog remained by the doorway, ears twitching at sounds Caleb couldn't quite make out. Every so often, his gaze would drift toward the direction of the barn again, like whatever was out there hadn't stopped existing just because night had fallen. Around 3 a.m., once Caleb finally sat up, he ran a hand over his face, then stood, pulling his jacket on without thinking. "All right," he said quietly. "No point pretending it's not there." Ranger moved instantly. The night air hit hard, colder than before. The clouds had thinned just enough to let a faint sliver of moonlight stretch across the land. It painted everything in muted silver. The broken fence, the leaning barn, the uneven ground that now held more weight than it should have. Caleb walked slower this time, not out of fear, out of respect. Ranger stayed slightly ahead, but not far, close enough to return in a second if needed. They reached the spot. The ground looked exactly as Caleb had left it, disturbed, covered, but not hidden. Caleb crouched down and brushed the dirt aside again. The steel surface reappeared, cold even through his gloves. He exhaled slowly. "Let's see what you are." The shovel went back in. This time he didn't hesitate. He cleared the edges fully, exposing the entire hatch. It was bigger than it had looked earlier. Heavy-duty, built with purpose. A thick handle sat near the center, rusted but intact. No labels, no markings, no warning, just silence. Caleb gripped the handle. For a moment, he paused. That instinct again. The one that had kept him alive more times than he could count. Unknown. Enclosed. No backup. He glanced at Ranger. The dog stood a few feet away, body low, ears forward, watching every movement. Not afraid, but not relaxed either. "Stay close," Caleb said. Ranger didn't move. Caleb tightened his grip and pulled. At first, nothing happened. The hatch didn't budge. As he adjusted his stance, planted his boots firmly into the ground, and pulled again, harder this time. The metal groaned, a deep, rusted sound that echoed strangely across the quiet land. Then, it shifted. Just slightly. Caleb paused, catching his breath. Then pulled again. This time the seal broke. A dull crack cut through the night as the hatch lifted open just enough to release something from below. Cold air. Not the kind carried by wind. This was different. Still. Heavy. It drifted upward slowly, brushing past Caleb's face like something that had been trapped for years and didn't quite remember how to move. Ranger took a step back. A low sound rumbled in his chest. Caleb noticed. "Yeah," he whispered. "I feel it too." He lifted the hatch fully. It resisted every inch but eventually gave way, swinging open with a long, dragging creak before settling against the ground beside it. Beneath it, darkness, complete. A black opening cut into the earth. Caleb grabbed the flashlight from his pocket and clicked it on. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing metal, a ladder, descending straight down, narrow, steep, and disappearing into something that swallowed the light before it reached the bottom. Caleb leaned closer. The air coming from below was colder now, not freezing, but unnatural. Still. Like the space beneath hadn't moved in a long time. He angled the flashlight further down. Concrete walls. Bare. Unmarked. No signs of collapse. No signs of life. Just a space waiting. Caleb's pulse slowed. Not from calm. from focus. His body shifted without him thinking, weight balanced, his breathing controlled, senses narrowing, old habits, old training. "All right," he said under his breath. He placed one foot onto the top rung. The metal groaned slightly under his weight. He paused. Waited. Nothing. No shift. No break. He began to descend. One rung at a time, slow, measured. The beam of his flashlight moved ahead of him, scanning every inch as he went. Ranger remained above, but not far. The dog stood at the edge of the opening, watching him, tracking every movement. Halfway down, Caleb stopped. Something felt off. The ladder vibrated slightly beneath his boots. He froze, listening. Then he saw it. The metal on one side, bent. Not much, but enough. Time had worn it down. One wrong move. The rung beneath his foot shifted, just slightly, but enough. Caleb's grip tightened instantly. "Oh, easy," he muttered. He adjusted his weight, moving slower now. Deliberate. Every step controlled. The air grew heavier the further he went. Not hard to breathe. Just stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Then, a sound from above. Sharp, urgent. Ranger barked. Once. Loud. Caleb looked up instinctively. That split second. The rung beneath him gave a little more. His boot slipped. Just an inch. But enough to throw his balance. Caleb's hand shot out, gripping the side rail. His body swung slightly before stabilizing. He froze, heart pounding now. All right. All right. Above him, Ranger paced at the edge, whining low, agitated. He knew. Caleb steadied himself, repositioned his foot carefully, and continued down, slower than before. When his boots finally touched solid ground, he exhaled. But he turned the flashlight outward. The beam widened across the space. Concrete floor, small room, bare, but not empty. Shapes formed at the edges of the light. Boxes, metal, stacked, organized. Caleb stepped forward slowly. His breath quiet now, controlled. The air here felt different. Still cold, still heavy, but holding something else. Something intentional. Above him, Ranger let out another low sound. Not panic, warning. Caleb didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on the first box in front of him. Dust covered it. Thick, undisturbed. He crouched down, brushing some of it away. The surface beneath was solid, reinforced, locked. Caleb swallowed slowly. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a place someone built to protect something, or hide it, or both. And now, he was standing inside it. Caleb didn't move right away. The beam of his flashlight trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the tension coiled through his muscles. Every instinct told him to scan first, act later. So he stood still, letting his eyes adjust, letting the space reveal itself piece by piece. The room wasn't large, 10 feet across, maybe 12. Concrete walls, smooth and cold, with no cracks, no signs of damage. Whoever built this place had built it to last. The air was thick, stale. It carried a faint metallic scent, mixed with something older. Paper, maybe, or time itself. Caleb took a slow step forward. The sound of his boot echoed softly, too softly. The kind of echo that told you the space wasn't as open as it looked. Ranger barked again from above. Short, sharp, as Caleb glanced up toward the opening. "I'm good," he called quietly. The dog didn't respond, but the pacing at the top of the ladder continued. Caleb could hear it now, the faint scrape of claws against metal, restless, uneasy. He turned back to the room. The boxes. There were 6 of them, stacked in 2 rows against the far wall. Each one was identical. Steel, reinforced corners, heavy locks that had turned dull with age. No labels, no markings, just like the hatch. Unmarked, unclaimed, unexplained. Caleb approached the closest one. Each step felt louder now, closer, more real. He crouched beside the first box, brushing away a layer of dust. His fingers left clear streaks across the surface. Untouched. For years. Maybe decades. He ran his hand along the edge of the lid. Solid. Sealed tight. Caleb reached for the latch, then stopped. A flicker of something crossed his mind. A memory. Not clear. Just a feeling. The same hesitation he'd felt before opening doors in places far from here. Places where what waited on the other side wasn't always what it seemed. He exhaled slowly. "You didn't come this far to turn around," he muttered. Above him, Ranger let out a low whine. Caleb ignored it. He gripped the latch, pulled. Nothing. The lock held. Rust had fused parts of it together, sealing it tighter than intended. Caleb shifted his position, planting one knee against the ground, and tried again, harder this time. The metal groaned. Then, a sharp crack. The latch gave. The sound echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls in a way that made the space feel suddenly smaller. Caleb froze, listening, waiting. Nothing, just silence again. He lifted the lid slowly. It resisted at first, then opened. The flashlight beam dipped inside, and for a moment, Caleb didn't understand what he was looking at. Then it hit him. Stacks, neatly arranged. Paper. Bundles. Wrapped tight. His breath caught. He reached in, pulling one of the bundles free. Cash. Old but preserved. Banding still intact. He turned it slightly under the light. Hundreds. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Caleb sat back slowly. "No," he whispered. His mind tried to process it. Failed. He looked back into the box. More stacks. Layer after layer. Carefully arranged. Not thrown in. Not hidden in panic. Stored. Planned. Deliberate. His hand trembled slightly as he set the bundle back down. This isn't normal," Ranger barked again, louder this time, once Caleb barely heard it. He moved to the next box. The latch on this one gave easier. When he opened it, the light reflected back at him. Gold. Coins. Dozens. Hundreds. Some sealed in plastic. Others loose but untouched by corrosion. He picked one up. Heavy. Cold. Real. Caleb's chest tightened. This can't be real. He moved faster now, not reckless, but driven. Each box, opened, one after another. Documents, old financial papers, certificates, bonds, stacks of currency preserved in airtight wrapping. Everything organized. Everything intentional. By the time he finished, Caleb was breathing harder. Not from effort, from disbelief. He sat down on the cold concrete floor, the flashlight resting beside him, its beam casting long shadows across the room. 50, he murmured. He hadn't counted exactly. It didn't need to. Years of experience told him enough. This is at least 50 million. The number felt wrong, just saying it. Too big. Too sudden. Too easy. Caleb leaned back slightly, one hand braced against the floor. Above him, Ranger's pacing had turned frantic. The dog barked again, this time louder, urgent. Caleb snapped his head up. "What is it?" he called. No answer. Just movement. Claws scraping. A low, rising growl. Caleb stood immediately. Something had changed. He didn't know what, but Ranger did. And that was enough. Caleb grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the ladder. Fast, but careful. Every step controlled. He reached the base and started climbing. Halfway up, he felt it again. That subtle shift. The ladder trembled slightly beneath his weight. He froze. "Easy." Above, Ranger barked sharply. Closer now, right at the edge. Caleb continued up, slower, testing each rung before committing his weight. The air felt heavier now, tighter, as if the space itself didn't want him leaving with what he had seen. When his hand reached the top edge, Ranger was right there, eyes wide, body tense, focused not on Caleb, but on something beyond him. Caleb pulled himself up and turned immediately. The land looked the same. The barn, the fence, the distant trees, nothing moved, nothing changed. But Ranger wasn't looking at the land. He was looking toward the road. Caleb followed his gaze. Far off, just beyond the ridge, a faint cloud of dust. Rising. Moving. A vehicle. Coming this way. Caleb's expression hardened. Not surprise. Not fear. Recognition. He looked back at the open hatch, and then at Ranger, then at the road again. "They weren't supposed to find this," he said quietly. Ranger let out a low growl, and for the first time since stepping onto that land, Caleb realized something that changed everything. The treasure below was never truly lost. It had just been waiting, and now, someone else might be coming for it. Caleb didn't move at first. His eyes stayed locked on the thin trail of dust rising beyond the ridge, drifting slowly into the sky like a quiet warning. The vehicle was still far enough that he couldn't make out details, but it was coming this way. That was enough. Ranger stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Caleb, his body angled toward the road. His ears were rigid, his posture sharp, every muscle ready. "All right," Caleb said under his breath. His mind shifted. No more questions. No more hesitation. Only decisions. He turned back to the open hatch. For a brief second, the darkness below seemed deeper than before, as if it had changed just by being discovered. The secret wasn't buried anymore. It was exposed. And exposure came with consequences. Caleb moved quickly. He grabbed the edge of the hatch and pulled it down, the metal groaning as it lowered. The sound felt louder now, heavier, like it carried weight beyond the steel itself. When it shut, it sealed with a dull, final thud. Caleb didn't stop there. He shoveled dirt back over the edges, working faster than before, covering the outline just enough to break its shape. Then he dragged an old wooden plank over the top, scattering loose debris across it. Not perfect, but enough to hide it. At a glance, Ranger stayed close, scanning the horizon, never taking his eyes off the direction of the approaching vehicle. Caleb stood, breathing steady now. He looked at the ground, then at the barn, then back toward the road. Everything felt different, because now he knew. This land wasn't just broken. It was holding something that didn't belong out in the open. Something someone might be willing to come back for. By the time the truck came into view, Caleb was already on the porch, sitting, waiting, like nothing had changed. Ranger lay beside him, still, but not relaxed. The vehicle rolled up slower than before, its tires crunching over the dry earth. Dust settled behind it in slow waves as it came to a stop near the fence. It was Travis, again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Two other men sat inside the truck, while silhouettes barely visible behind the tinted windows. Caleb noticed that immediately. He didn't react, didn't stand, just watched. Travis stepped out, closing the door with a firm, controlled motion. He adjusted his jacket and took a few steps forward, his boots pressing into the dirt like he owned it. "Morning," he called out. Caleb gave a slight nod. "Something like that." Travis glanced around, slower this time, more careful. His eyes lingered on the barn, then moved across the ground, then back to Caleb. "You been digging?" he asked casually. Caleb's expression didn't change. "Fixing posts?" Travis smirked faintly. "Yeah?" His gaze shifted again, to the ground, to the uneven patches of dirt, to the place where the hatch had been. Ranger let out a low, almost silent growl. Travis heard it, and his eyes flicked toward the dog, then back to Caleb. "That dog's got good instincts," he said. "He does." A pause, long enough to feel. Travis took another step forward, then stopped. Didn't get closer. Didn't need to. "Funny thing about land like this," he said slowly. "People think it's worthless, like it's just empty space." Caleb didn't answer. Travis continued. "But it ain't always empty." His tone had changed, subtle, but clear. Caleb met his gaze now. Neither man spoke for a moment. The wind moved through the trees behind them, a low, steady sound that filled the silence between words. Then Travis shrugged, like none of it mattered. "Anyway," he said, stepping back, "just checking in." He turned toward the truck, then paused, looked back once more. "You ever find something out here?" he added quietly. "You let me know." Caleb's voice was calm. "I'll keep that in mind." Travis nodded once, got back into the truck. The engine started. The vehicle turned slowly, then drove off, disappearing back toward the ridge, leaving another trail of dust behind. Caleb watched until it was gone. Only then did he exhale. Ranger stood, moved closer. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's head. "They know something," he said. Not a guess, a conclusion. Ranger didn't move, but his eyes shifted back toward the barn again. The rest of the day passed slower than any before it, not because of the work, but because of what Caleb now carried in his mind. $50 million, buried beneath his land, unclaimed, unreported, unprotected. He tried to go back to work, tried to focus on the broken fence, on the loose boards, and on anything that kept his hands busy, but the weight of it stayed. Every time he looked toward the barn, every time the wind shifted, every time Ranger paused and listened. By late afternoon, Caleb sat on the porch again. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the land. The golden light made everything look softer than it was, warmer. But Caleb didn't feel it. He stared out at the field, at the place where the hatch lay hidden beneath dirt and wood. His mind moved through possibilities. Leave it. Walk away. Pretend it never happened. But that wasn't real. Not anymore. He had seen it, touched it, opened it. There was no going back to not knowing. Ranger stepped closer and sat beside him. Caleb glanced down at the dog. "You found it," he said quietly. Ranger leaned into him slightly. Steady, present, and Caleb looked back out at the land. "That kind of money," he continued, voice low, almost distant. It doesn't just get buried and forgotten. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, carrying a deeper chill. Caleb felt it settle into his bones. Not cold, not fear. Something else. Understanding. This wasn't an accident, he said. Ranger didn't respond, but he didn't need to, because Caleb already knew the treasure below wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. Not because of what it was, but because of who might still be connected to it. And as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, casting the land into shadow once more, Caleb realized something that settled deeper than the cold. Finding it was only the beginning. That night, Caleb didn't even try to sleep. He sat at the small wooden table inside the farmhouse, a lantern flickering beside him, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls like memories he couldn't shake. The wind had calmed, but the silence felt heavier than before. Not empty. Waiting. Ranger lay near the door, head up, eyes alert. He hadn't relaxed since Travis left. Neither had Caleb. On the table in front of him sat a small metal box. He hadn't planned on bringing anything up from below, but something about the documents in the bunker had bothered him. Not the money, not the gold, the papers. So before sealing the hatch earlier, he had taken one. Just one. The box wasn't large, maybe the size of an old ammunition case. It had been sealed tight, wrapped carefully to keep out moisture and time. Caleb ran his fingers along its edge. Cold. And he had cleaned it earlier, removing the dust that had hidden it for years. The latch was still intact, though aged. He stared at it for a long moment, then opened it. Inside, more documents. Not random. Organized. Bound together with faded twine. Caleb lifted the first stack and set it gently on the table. His eyes moved across the pages. And slowly, his expression changed. These weren't simple records. They weren't farm ownership papers or tax documents. They were something else. Financial logs, transactions, names, numbers that didn't make sense at first glance, but when they did, Caleb leaned back slightly. This wasn't just savings, he murmured. The numbers were too large, too structured, too hidden. Transfers across states, across countries. Some pages dated decades back, others more recent. All connected, all deliberate. His jaw tightened. This was a system. Ranger shifted slightly near the door, his ears twitching. Caleb didn't look up. He flipped to another page, then another, then a name. His hand stopped. He read it again. Then again. Boone, he whispered. The same name. Different document. Different year. But the same last name. Caleb's grip tightened on the paper. That's not a coincidence. Ranger stood up now. Slow, quiet, moving closer. Caleb's mind moved fast, connecting pieces. The land, the hidden bunker, the money, the way Travis looked at the property, the way he talked about things being left behind. He wasn't guessing. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough. Caleb sat back, exhaling slowly. This place wasn't abandoned, he said. But Ranger stopped beside him, still, listening. It was forgotten on purpose. The realization settled in like weight pressing down on his chest. Not panic, not fear. Something colder, clearer. The kind of understanding that didn't leave room for denial. Whoever built that bunker hadn't just hidden money. They had hidden something that needed to disappear. And now, it had been found. The next morning came with no relief. The sky was clear, but the air felt sharper, colder. Caleb stepped outside early, scanning the land instinctively. No vehicles, no movement. But that didn't mean anything. Not anymore. Ranger moved ahead, following the same path as always, but slower now, more deliberate. They walked toward the barn again. Neither of them spoke. The ground was still disturbed where Caleb had worked the day before, but from a distance, it looked untouched. Normal. That word didn't mean much anymore. Caleb stopped a few feet from the spot. He didn't uncover it this time. Didn't open it. He just stood there, thinking, weighing. Ranger lowered his head, sniffing again, then lifted it, looking toward the road. Always the road. Caleb followed his gaze. Nothing there. But he knew better now. Someone's going to come back, he said quietly. Ranger didn't move, but his posture said enough. Caleb turned away. They walked back toward the house, but the feeling followed them. By midday, Caleb made a decision. He didn't like it, but he knew it was the only way forward. He got into his truck. Ranger jumped in beside him. They drove into town, but the same looks followed him, the same quiet judgment. But this time, Caleb didn't notice. His focus was elsewhere. He stopped in front of a small office building near the edge of town. A weathered sign hung above the door. Law Offices of Daniel Price. Caleb stepped out. Ranger stayed close. Inside, the office smelled like paper and old wood. A woman behind the desk looked up, surprised to see him. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to speak with Mr. Price." "Do you have an appointment?" "No." She hesitated, then nodded. "Let me see if he's available." A few minutes later, Caleb sat across from a man in his early 60s, glasses resting low on his nose, a calm but sharp look in his eyes. "What can I do for you?" the lawyer asked. Caleb didn't waste time. "I bought a property outside town," he said. $5. "My old farm." The lawyer nodded slightly. "I've heard about it." Caleb leaned forward. "There's something on that land," he said. The lawyer's expression didn't change. "What kind of something?" Caleb held his gaze. "Something that doesn't belong to me," he said, "but might now." A pause. The air in the room shifted. The lawyer sat back slightly. "Start from the beginning," he said. Caleb did. Not everything, but enough. The bunker, the contents, the documents, the name. Boone. The lawyer listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then the lawyer spoke. "If what you're saying is accurate," he said slowly, "this isn't just about ownership." Caleb nodded. "I figured." The lawyer leaned forward slightly. "You need to be careful," he said. "Oh, very careful." Caleb didn't smile. "I've been careful my whole life." The lawyer met his eyes. "Then you know this already," he said. "Money like that doesn't stay hidden without reason." Caleb's voice was steady. "I know." Another pause, then. "We can do this the right way," the lawyer continued. "But it's going to take time and discretion." Caleb nodded once. "I'm not in a hurry." The lawyer glanced toward the window, then back at Caleb. "Good," he said, "because if someone else knows about it—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Caleb stood. "So we move quiet," he said. The lawyer nodded. "Quiet is good." That evening, Caleb returned to the farm. The sun was already dropping behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land. Ranger stepped out of the truck first, paused, listened. Emma then moved forward. Caleb followed. Everything looked the same. The house, the barn, the field. Still. Silent. But now, Caleb understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't just his land anymore. It was a place with a past that hadn't stayed buried. And as he stood there, looking out across the fading light, he felt it again. That quiet, creeping awareness. They weren't alone in this anymore. And somewhere out there, someone else was already thinking the same thing. Night fell faster than usual, or maybe it just felt that way. The last light slipped behind the mountains, leaving the land in a deep, heavy shadow that seemed to settle into every crack of the old farm. The wind had died down, but the silence that replaced it wasn't calm. It was waiting. Caleb stood on the porch, his arms resting lightly against the railing, eyes scanning the horizon. He had seen this kind of stillness before, the kind that came just before something changed. Ranger stood beside him, not lying down this time. His body was upright, tense, ears shifting at every faint sound carried through the night air. "You feel it too," Caleb said quietly. Ranger didn't move, didn't blink. His gaze stayed fixed toward the road. The first sound was distant, so faint it could have been mistaken for wind brushing against the hills. But it wasn't. Caleb heard it. An engine. Low. Controlled. Approaching without urgency, but without hesitation. Ranger let out a low growl. Caleb straightened slightly. "They're not even trying to hide it," he muttered. The headlights didn't come on until the truck cleared the ridge. Just two beams cut through the darkness, stretching across the land as the vehicle rolled slowly toward the farm. Not fast, not cautious, confident. Caleb stepped down from the porch. Ranger moved ahead of him. The truck didn't stop at the gate this time. It drove straight through. The tires crushed over the dry ground, coming to a halt just a few yards from the house. The engine stayed running. 3 men stepped out. Travis Boone first, then the 2 others Caleb had seen earlier. Different up close, harder. Their movements were measured, but not uncertain. They knew why they were here. Caleb stood his ground. Ranger positioned himself slightly in front, his body angled between Caleb and the men. "Evening," Travis said. His voice was calm. Too calm. Caleb didn't respond. Travis took a few steps closer. He was stopping just outside the reach of the porch light. "Long day?" he asked. Caleb's voice was steady. "What do you want, Travis?" The name hung in the air. Direct. Clear. Travis smiled faintly. "I figured we could skip the small talk," he said. A pause. Then, "You found something." Not a question. A statement. Ranger's growl deepened. Caleb didn't react. "Been doing some digging," Travis continued. "More than just fixing fences." Caleb held his gaze. "You've been watching me." Travis shrugged. "Small town," he said. "Hard not to notice things." The 2 men behind him shifted slightly, spreading out just enough to change the space. Not aggressive, but intentional. Caleb saw it, measured it, adjusted his stance slightly. Old instincts rising again. "Whatever you think I found," Caleb said calmly. "Huh, you're wrong." Travis's smile didn't fade. "Don't do that," he said softly. "You're too smart for that." He took another step forward. Closer now. Close enough that the porch light caught his face fully. "Let's make this simple," Travis continued. "You hand it over, and we all walk away." Caleb's eyes didn't move. "Hand what over?" The silence stretched. Ranger took 1 step forward. The growl now low and steady. Warning. Travis glanced down at the dog, then back at Caleb. "You don't want to play this game," he said. Caleb's voice stayed level. Then don't start it. Something shifted. Subtle, but real. The air between them tightened. Travis's expression hardened just slightly. Not anger, not yet, but the patience, thinning. One of the men behind him stepped forward. "Look," he said, voice rough. "We know what's out here." Caleb turned his head just enough to look at him. "Do you?" The man hesitated, just for a second. "Enough." Travis raised a hand slightly. The man stepped back. Travis looked at Caleb again. "Last chance," he said. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. Caleb didn't move, didn't blink. "Nothing here belongs to you," he said. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. Then, it broke. The man on the left moved suddenly, not fast enough. Ranger reacted first. The dog lunged forward, placing himself directly between Caleb and the advancing man, barking sharply, teeth bared. The man stopped short. "Easy!" Travis snapped. Ranger didn't back down. His body lowered, muscles tight, eyes locked. A warning. Clear, unmistakable. Caleb stepped forward slightly, placing a hand on Ranger's back. "Stay," he said quietly. The dog held position, but didn't relax. Travis exhaled slowly. "Not how I wanted this to go," he said. Caleb's voice was calm. "Then you should have stayed off my land." Another pause. Long, heavy. Then Travis stepped back. Not defeated, not retreating. Just choosing something else. "For now," he said. He turned, motioning to the others. They hesitated, then followed. The truck doors slammed. The engine revved. The headlights swept across the land once more as the vehicle turned and drove off into the night. The sound faded slowly, until it was gone. Caleb didn't move right away. Neither did Ranger. They stood there, watching the darkness where the truck had disappeared, listening, waiting. Only when the silence settled again did Caleb exhale. "That wasn't over," he said. Ranger turned his head slightly, looking up at him. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's neck. "They're coming back," he continued. "And next time—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ranger leaned into him slightly. Steady. Ready. Caleb looked out across the land, toward the barn, toward the ground that now held more than just dirt and steel, toward the secret that had changed everything. His voice was quieter now, but stronger. "They think it's theirs." The wind picked up again, brushing across the field. Caleb's eyes hardened. But they're wrong. And for the first time since stepping onto that land, he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was preparing. The farm didn't look different the next morning. Same broken fence, same leaning barn, and same quiet stretch of land that most people still believed was worthless. But everything had changed. Caleb moved through it differently now, more aware, more deliberate. Every step measured, every sound noted. Ranger stayed close, no longer wandering ahead like before. His movements mirrored Caleb's, controlled, watchful, ready. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Caleb spent the early hours reinforcing what little he had. He secured the doors, checked the windows, cleared lines of sight from the porch to the road, not out of fear, out of habit. The kind of preparation that had once kept him alive in places far more dangerous than this. But this was different, because this time, there was something worth protecting, and someone. Ranger followed him as he moved between the house and the barn, and occasionally stopping to scan the horizon. Always the horizon. Always the road. By midday, Caleb stood at the edge of the disturbed ground, where the bunker lay hidden beneath. He hadn't opened it again, hadn't gone back down. Not since the night before. The memory of those documents stayed with him. The names, the transactions, the truth. This wasn't just buried money. It was evidence. And that meant something bigger, something that didn't end with Travis Boone. Caleb crouched down slowly, resting one hand on the earth, cold, even under the sun. Ranger stood beside him, still. Then, a soft whine. Caleb looked at him. "What is it?" Ranger's gaze shifted, not to the ground, but back toward the house. Caleb followed. Nothing moved. Nothing obvious. But something in the air had changed. Again. Caleb stood. Inside," he said quietly. Ranger didn't hesitate. They moved together. The call came in the early afternoon. Caleb sat at the small table again, the metal box in front of him, when the phone rang. He didn't jump, didn't hesitate, just picked it up. "Hayes, it's Daniel Price." The lawyer's voice was calm, but tighter than before. "I did some preliminary checks," Price continued. "Names from the documents you mentioned." Caleb leaned back slightly. "And?" A pause. Then, "You were right to be concerned." Caleb's grip on the phone tightened. "Those accounts, they're tied to shell corporations. Offshore. Layered ownership structures. Meaning? Meaning whoever set this up didn't want to be found." Caleb nodded slowly. "And Boone?" Another pause. "Connected," Price said. "Not directly. Oh, but close enough to raise serious questions." Caleb exhaled through his nose. "I figured." "There's more," the lawyer added. Caleb waited. "Some of those entities, they went dark years ago. Suddenly. No explanation. Like they disappeared." "Yes." Silence settled between them. Then Price spoke again. "Mr. Hayes, if what's on your land is part of that, this isn't just a local issue." Caleb's voice stayed steady. "I'm not surprised." "You should consider stepping away," Price said carefully. "Let authorities handle it." Caleb looked toward the window, toward the barn, toward the ground beneath it. "They won't get here in time," he said. Price didn't argue. He knew. "I'll start the process," the lawyer said, quietly, "but you need to stay safe." Caleb gave a small, almost humorless breath. "Oh, safe hasn't been part of the plan in a long time." The call ended. Caleb sat there for a long moment after. The room felt smaller, heavier. Ranger moved closer, resting his head lightly against Caleb's leg, grounding him. Caleb reached down, placing a hand on the dog's head. "You hear that?" he said quietly. "This thing's bigger than we thought." Ranger didn't move, didn't need to. Caleb's eyes shifted back to the metal box, to the documents, to the truth sitting right in front of him. And for the first time, a real choice formed. Not about survival, not about defense, no. Something deeper, something harder. He could walk away, call it in, let someone else deal with it, let the land go, let the money go, let the past stay buried. Or he could face it, all of it, the danger, the people behind it, the consequences. Caleb leaned forward slightly. His voice was quiet, but firm. "I'm done running." Ranger lifted his head. Their eyes met. Caleb nodded once. Decision made. That evening, the sky turned a deep orange as the sun sank low over the mountains. Caleb stood on the porch again. But this time, he wasn't watching for what might come. He was ready for it. The land stretched out before him, silent, but no longer unknown. Every inch of it now held meaning. Every shadow held possibility. Ranger sat beside him, calm, alert, unshaken. Caleb looked down at him. "You stayed," he said softly. The dog's ears twitched slightly. "You always do." A pause. Then Caleb looked back out across the land. "They think this is about money." His voice carried quietly into the open air. "Oh, but it's not." The wind moved through the field, brushing against the grass in slow waves. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's about what they tried to hide." And for the first time since this all began, there was no doubt left, no hesitation, only clarity. Whatever was buried beneath that farm was never meant to be found. And now that it had been, Caleb Hayes wasn't going to let it disappear again. The next few days passed without incident. No trucks, no visitors, no shadows moving along the edges of the property. To anyone else, it might have felt like the danger had passed. But Caleb knew better. Silence like this didn't mean safety. It meant distance. Distance before something returned stronger, more prepared. He didn't waste it. By sunrise each morning, Caleb was already working, fixing the roof, and reinforcing the barn, running new lines for water and power, using what little equipment he could salvage or piece together. It wasn't fast work, but it was steady, purposeful, the kind of work that gave structure to the day and something else to the mind. Because when he stopped moving, the memories came back, not gently, not quietly. A dropped tool would echo like a gunshot. A sudden gust of wind would feel like something approaching from behind. The old instincts never left. They just waited. And sometimes, late at night, they came back all at once. One night, it hit harder than usual. Caleb woke up suddenly, breath short, body tense. The room was dark, too dark. For a moment he didn't know where he was, didn't know what year it was, didn't know if he was home or somewhere else entirely. But his hand moved instinctively, reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. A weapon, a memory. His chest tightened. The walls felt too close, too silent. Then, a soft weight pressed against his side. Warm, steady, real. Ranger. The dog didn't bark, didn't move suddenly. He just stayed there, leaning in, grounding him. Caleb's breathing slowed. Bit by bit, the room came back into focus. The shadows became walls again. The silence became just silence. Caleb placed a hand on Ranger's neck. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'm here." Ranger stayed, didn't leave. He never did. The next morning, Caleb sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The land stretched out in front of him, golden under the rising sun. Different now, not just because of what lay beneath it, but because of what it had become. What a place that had almost broken him was starting to rebuild him instead. Ranger lay at his feet, resting but alert as always. Caleb looked out across the field. "They were right about one thing," he said quietly. Ranger's ears shifted slightly. This place needed work. A faint smile touched Caleb's face, then faded. But they were wrong about everything else. He stood slowly, the day ahead already forming in his mind. Not just repairs, not just survival. Something more. Later that afternoon, a truck pulled up at the edge of the property. Not fast, not aggressive, different. Caleb saw it immediately. So did Ranger. They both stood, watching. The truck stopped near the gate. A man stepped out. Not Travis, not one of the others. Older, clean-cut, wearing a simple jacket, hands visible, non-threatening. Oh, but careful. Caleb didn't move toward him right away. He waited. Let the man make the first step. The man approached slowly, stopping several yards away. "Mr. Hayes," he called out. Caleb stepped forward just enough to be seen clearly. "That's me." The man nodded. "My name is Robert Ellis," he said. "I'm with federal investigators." Caleb didn't react. Not outwardly. But something inside him shifted. "Mind if we talk?" Ellis asked. Caleb glanced at Ranger, then back at the man. "You can talk from there." Ellis gave a small, understanding nod. "Fair enough." A pause, then, "We've been looking into certain financial networks for a long time," Ellis said. "Offshore accounts, disappearing assets, people who vanish when things get too close." Caleb's voice was calm. "And you think it's here?" Ellis met his gaze. "We know something was hidden on this land," he said. "We just didn't know if it was still here." Silence. The wind moved lightly across the field. Ranger remained still, watching. Ellis continued. "You've already done the hard part," he said. "You found it." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "And now?" Ellis took a slow breath. "Now we make sure it doesn't disappear again." The words hung there, heavy, but different from Travis's. No pressure, no threat, just truth. Caleb studied him for a long moment, measuring, reading, old habits. Then, "You're late," Caleb said. Ellis didn't argue. "We usually are." A faint hint of honesty. Caleb exhaled slowly, then stepped forward. Not all the way, but enough. "Nothing leaves this land," he said. "Not without me knowing." Ellis nodded. "That's fair." Another pause. Then Caleb added, "And nobody gets hurt." Ellis's expression softened slightly. "That's the goal." By evening, the land felt different again. Not watched, not threatened, but seen for what it really was. Caleb stood near the barn as the sun dipped low once more. Ranger beside him, always beside him. The ground beneath them still held its secret. But now, that secret wasn't just his burden to carry. Caleb looked down at Ranger. "You did this," he said quietly. The dog tilted his head slightly. Caleb reached down, scratching behind his ear. "You found it." Ranger leaned into the touch. Simple, loyal, unchanged. Caleb looked back out across the land. For the first time since arriving here, he felt something settle inside him. Not tension, not fear. Something else. Something quieter. Peace, beginning to take shape. The farm still needed work. The past still lingered. And the future wasn't fully written yet. But as Caleb stood there, the last light fading across the mountains, he understood something clearly. This place hadn't just given him a second chance. It had given him a purpose. And this time, he wasn't going to lose it. The first snow came early that year. It drifted in overnight, soft and silent, covering the rough edges of the land in a clean, unbroken white. By morning, the farm looked almost unfamiliar, like something new had been laid gently over something old. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, the cold air biting just enough to wake his senses. Ranger followed, his paws pressing into the fresh snow, leaving a trail that would be gone by afternoon. Caleb stood still for a moment, and listening. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, not waiting. Just quiet. real quiet. The kind he hadn't known in a long time. Weeks had passed since the night Travis came, since the lawyer, since the man from the government. Things had moved quickly after that. Quietly, just like they said they would. Vehicles had come and gone during the day. People who didn't ask questions. People who didn't speak more than necessary. The bunker had been opened again. But this time, not by Caleb alone. Everything inside had been documented, secured, handled with care, not taken, not hidden again. For the first time in decades, the truth had been brought into the light, and with it, the weight Caleb had been carrying began to lift, not all at once, but enough. Travis Boone hadn't come back. A word spread through town slowly, not loudly, not in headlines, but in the quiet way small towns understand things without saying them directly. People stopped laughing, stopped whispering, stopped looking at Caleb like he was a man who had made a mistake. Now, they looked at him differently, with distance, with respect, maybe even with a little regret. Caleb didn't pay it much attention. He wasn't here for them. The farm changed, day by day, board by board, fence by fence. The barn stood stronger now. The house held warmth. Water ran clean. Lights stayed on through the night. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, built by hands that didn't quit, by a man who had nothing left to prove, except to himself. And beside him, always, Ranger. The dog had healed. Some of the scar along his side still showed where he had been hurt, but it didn't slow him down. If anything, it seemed to make him more determined, more aware, more present. He stayed close, even on the calm days, especially on the calm days, as if he knew those were the ones that mattered most. One afternoon, Caleb stood at the edge of the field, looking out across the land. Snow had melted in patches, revealing the earth beneath. Strong, unbroken. Ranger stood beside him, watching the same horizon. Caleb crossed his arms lightly. "You remember the first day we got here?" he asked. Ranger's ears flicked. Caleb let out a quiet breath. "They all thought we were crazy." A small pause. "Maybe we were." Ranger stepped forward slightly, sniffing the air. Caleb smiled faintly. "But we stayed." He looked down at the dog. "Chum, and that made all the difference." Later that evening, Caleb sat on the porch as the sun dipped low once more, painting the sky in deep gold and fading blue. The mountains stood still in the distance, unchanged, unmoving. But everything else had shifted. Ranger lay at his feet, calm, steady, his breathing slow and even. Caleb rested his hands on his knees, looking out across the land that had once been nothing more than a rumor of failure. Now, it was something else entirely. Not because of what had been hidden beneath it, not because of the money, but because of what had been built above it, piece by piece, day by day, choice by choice. Caleb spoke softly, almost to himself. They thought this place was empty. The wind moved gently through the field. Ranger lifted his head slightly. Caleb's voice lowered. "Oh, but it was waiting." A pause. Then he reached down, resting a hand on Ranger's neck. "And so were we." The dog leaned into the touch, unshaken, unbreakable. Caleb looked out one last time as the sun disappeared completely behind the mountains. Darkness settled in. But it didn't feel like the kind that closed in anymore. It felt like the kind that let things rest. And as the stars began to appear overhead, Caleb Hayes finally understood. The greatest thing he had found on that land wasn't buried beneath steel and dirt. It wasn't locked inside a bunker. It wasn't counted in numbers. It was something simpler, something quieter, something that had never left him. A second chance, a purpose, and a companion who had never once walked away. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, taking in the cold, the silence, the peace, and then opened them again. Still there, still real, still his. And this time, it was enough. If this story meant something to you, if you felt even a small part of Caleb's journey, I want you to do something simple. Just comment 1 below. No long message, no explanation needed. Just 1. It lets me know you were here. You felt it. And you stayed until the end. And if you believe loyalty still matters, if you believe a dog can be more than family, comment 2. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, real, emotional, powerful journeys about veterans, loyalty, and second chances, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next story might hit even deeper, and I'll see you there.